First of all, just kind of going in this no particular order, this is an illustrator for this piece, but the section on the idea of putting together a presentation software and basically the idea that at least this photo right here, this little picture here, showing you this example of a PowerPoint, not only with that but with their logo as well, and trying to keep a little bit with the space as it is the 50th year coming up for the anniversary of the moon landing in July coming up here. So most of you may have been familiar with PowerPoint through Microsoft with the three softwares they have with uh, word processing and Excel as a spreadsheet software. So it's trying to get you along with those pieces. And Adobe is the secondary software that's covered up everything. So when you go into an image definition of a software or manipulation, Photoshop is the kind of the leading software for that piece. However, when you take a look at it as far as a section, it's not the only one that's out there. There's others, but it's kind of the standard for all of the sections and graphics. And you've used it so far, and you want to keep in mind that as the editors are finished using it, so when you're using Photoshop, you can't save the file for everybody or anybody to open that up. So it has to be brought into, saved into, or created as a GIF, a JPEG, the PNG file, and if it's going to have all of the non-compressed or lossy information, it has to go into something like a TIFF file. There's EPS. PDF sometimes keeps all of their graphics as well. So Photoshop is kind of the standard that you're working with in the Creative Suite. The other part is when it's a graphic software where it's just the vector part of it. We'll talk about both of those. Raster for the Photoshop and vector for Illustrator. Take a look at that part. And again, there's a couple other softwares out there, CorelDRAW, for example, and here's the logo for both listed up in here. So when you take a look at those pieces, and again, we'll talk about the vector of how they're placed together, but it's for the more flat graphics. And now both Illustrator and Photoshop both happen to have sections in their software that allow you to do the vector and a little bit of the raster. So when you take a look at Illustrator, has some of the effects that are brought over from Photoshop, and when you're in Photoshop, you can actually use the pen tool in creating some vector lines. So not each software, there's not one software that has everything. You have to kind of work in tandem and try to find the best result for that. The one that we haven't tried yet is the page layout program. So when you take a look at this definition, at least for this part, it gives you the idea that it's just a kind of a placeholder for everything. All the images are tendency is they're just brought in or linked to the file, so that if you ever link a file image into this InDesign as the software, if you ever link the file in there and then move the photo image to another folder, you'll have broken that link. So that's the importance of trying to sometimes embed the file. Makes the file larger, but for the most part, it's just a kind of a hovering over there. It's just using everything brought in. All the text is there, but all the graphics or photos or everything like that are just placed in there. So it doesn't really have all that part, but it does have all the attributes for laying out the type and all of the formatting that you can put into for that. And this is just an image over on this side showing the page layout for that section. So when you take a look at this section, you can kind of see there's columns, the text, did a little text wrapping around the photos, that type of thing, and it gets you a little bit connected with that. And that'll give you the section. And then the next two kind of relating directly to the image software, Photoshop in this case, is the raster. And just go ahead and take that up there, just making the formatting. And that has the grid-like of all the pixels that you're going to see. Just like the screen or the monitor, the more you blow it up inside, you'll be able to see the resolution in pixels. And vector is the mathematical parts trying to connect it with just the lines. And these relate both to Photoshop or Illustrator, or they have Corel Draw and Corel Paint for the PC side. And on this image right here, you can see, even though it's pixelated on this side, the raster is trying to make that clean edge, or the vector, and then the raster has the blown up piece of this. So this is just the raster image that you can see the pixels in an exploded view a little bit here. And down below showing the letter, having the vector, and then changing it into this side. So this is also allowing you in Illustrator to change the outlines of the type so that you can use that in a different piece, so it's locked into the font for that section. So two different pieces for raster and vector. And then the animation, done a little bit with the animation, just kind of touched on it. But that's just the repeating of the images, and this is mostly, so far, at least with Adobe Animate, is just a vector type animation. You can still have the raster images brought in from Photoshop, but the actual inherent characteristic of this software is a vector-based piece. And here it's just showing you the stage along with the timeline and all the tools, kind of a blurred picture, but that's just the layout for it, giving you those options. And again, Illustrator has a section that you can animate with, as well as Photoshop has sections for giving you a timeline to animate some of the items. And then the last two here, just referring back to spreadsheet, which is pretty well cornered in the market as software goes with Microsoft. So they have the Excel, and we haven't used it in here, but it does have a similar segment in Illustrator for doing bar graphs. So we'll touch on that a little bit. But it gives you the columns and rows for putting out information, calculating, making calculations, everything from that piece. So it's kind of going into that section. And the word processing is used mainly in the offices, not necessarily as much in the graphics. They'll get the files coming in to use, and they'll then transfer that into something like InDesign, which is the software we talked about before. Used to be called, the predominant software for that was Quark, and then PageMaker was the one before that, long time ago. So these sections just showing you the type, and it's almost referring back to a typewriter as far as how it was generating from there. So just online word processing. So just those software just to touch on, and hopefully you can see as the file formats that we talked about before, how they're taken out, used, whether it's through digital transformation and software for email, or if it's something that has to be printed, just trying to keep all that intact so you have those combinations of where they're headed. Just giving you a little bit of that graphic.